Welcome, my friend. Let everything slow. There is a kind of child who is loved and a kind of child who is used, and the cruelty of Messmer's story is that he was both by the same mother at the same time. He was the son of Marika the Eternal, born with fire in him and a serpent coiled beneath the fire, raised to be a weapon and abandoned when the weapon had served its purpose. He spent an eternity in a realm cut off from the world, waging a war his mother had given him, waiting for her to return, not knowing she had erased him from history. Everything about Messmer is the story of a child who gave his whole self to a mother, who used him and threw him away. Tonight we begin at the beginning, with his birth, his fire, and the curse that was coiled in him from the start, before we follow him through the Crusade and the Abandonment and the bitter end across the parts that come. Hornsent, the firstborn. Messmer was the son of Queen Marika the Eternal, and the lore suggests he may have been the first of all her children. His birth is placed before the Second Leonian War, in the early period of Marika's rise, earlier than the births of the demigods the base game shows us. The lore notes that Messmer was likely born earlier than the other demigods, that he is older than Radan, who was himself born before Miquella and Millennia and Rani and the rest. When Messmer was born remains unknown, because all mention of him was erased by his mother after she abandoned him in the Land of Shadow. But the implication runs through the lore that Messmer was among the eldest of Marika's children, perhaps the firstborn, the first son of the Eternal Queen. He bore the red hair of Radagon, the mark of Marika's second self, and of the children born of that union, which suggests that Messmer was a child of Marika and Radagon, born of a single god, as the Empyrean children were. The lore implies, though it does not state outright, that Messmer was an Empyrean child of Marika Radagon, one of those born with the potential the Empyreans carried. The red hair tied him to Radagon and to the line that included Millennia and Miquella and the other red-haired children of that union. There is a particular significance to his being possibly the firstborn of a god, the eldest son of the Eternal Queen, should have held a place of honor, an inheritance, a future. Instead, Messmer's place in the family was defined from the start by the curse he was born with and the use his mother would make of him. The eldest son, who might have been the heir, was instead the cursed one, the weapon, the scapegoat, and in the end, the abandoned and erased. Whatever Messmer might have been as the firstborn of Marika, what he became was the used and discarded son, his seniority counting for nothing against the curse and the purpose his mother assigned him. The firstborn became the forsaken, the eldest, the most thoroughly abandoned, his place at the head of the family inverted into a place outside it entirely. The erased son. There is a fact about Messmer that shapes how we even come to know him, and it is worth pausing on, because it is itself part of his tragedy. Messmer was erased from history. When the base game of Elden Ring was released, Messmer did not exist in it. Marika's children were known: Godwyn, Morgoth, Marg, Radan, Rykard, Rani, Millennia, Miquella. The family tree of the Eternal Queen was laid out across the lands between, and Messmer was not in it. He was revealed only with the shadow of the Erdtree, the expansion that opened the land of shadow and showed the world a son of Marika that the base game had never mentioned. This absence was not an oversight. It was, within the story, a deliberate erasure. All mention of Messmer was erased by his mother after she abandoned him in the Land of Shadow. Marika did not only abandon her son in a realm cut off from the world, she erased him, removed him from the record, struck his name from the history of the lands between, so that the realm she ruled would not remember that he had existed. The reason the base game does not mention Messmer is that Marika erased him, and the player learns of him only by entering the hidden realm, where he was abandoned and forgotten. There is a depth of cruelty in this that goes beyond the abandonment. To abandon a son is one thing. To erase him, to remove all trace of him, to ensure that the world forgets he ever lived, is another. Marika did not only leave Messmer in the land of shadow. She made him a secret, a thing unmentioned, a son the lands between did not know it had. The firstborn, perhaps, of the Eternal Queen, was erased so wholly that an entire world could rise and fall and contend over Marika's legacy without ever knowing that Messmer had been. The crusade he waged, the suffering he endured, the loyalty he kept, all of it happened in a realm cut off and forgotten, erased from the history of the world he had served. The vision of fire. Messmer bore a vision of fire, and the fire is one of the central facts of his nature. Like one of his sisters, Messmer was born with a vision of fire, an affinity for flame, a fire that lived in him and expressed itself in the flame magic he wielded. The lore connects this to Melina, who also bore a vision of fire, who would serve as the kindling to burn the Erdtree. Messmer and Melina, brother and sister, both carried the fire. Both bore the vision of flame that marked certain of Marika's children. Messmer's kindling, his key item, could burn the sealing tree of the land of shadow, just as Melina's kindling could burn the Erdtree. The two fire-bearing siblings each carried a flame capable of burning one of the great trees. But Messmer's relationship to his own fire was not one of pride or mastery. It was one of hatred. The lore is clear and poignant about this. Messmer despised the flame inside himself, and time again hoped to rid himself of it, but found that it ever burned. The fire that was central to his nature was a thing he loathed, a power he wished to be free of, a flame he could not extinguish no matter how he hated it. He carried within him a fire he despised, that would not go out, that defined him against his will. This hatred of his own fire is the first sign of the deep self-division that runs through Messmer. He was a being at war with himself, carrying powers he did not want, a fire he despised, and, beneath the fire, a serpent he feared. The flame that made him a weapon for his mother's crusade was a flame he hated to wield. The very thing that made him useful to Marika, the destructive fire that would burn the land of shadow, was the thing he most wished to be rid of. Messmer was made to be a creature of fire, and made to hate the fire he was made of, his usefulness and his suffering the same flame. The connection to Melina deserves a moment, because it ties Messmer to one of the base game's most beloved figures and deepens the family tragedy. Melina, the maiden who accompanies the Tarnished through the base game, who offers her accompaniment and her guidance, who in some endings becomes the kindling to burn the Erdtree, bore a vision of fire as Messmer did. The lore links them. Messmer's kindling speaks of a younger sister who also bore a vision of fire, and the description, the faded red hair, the corresponding butterfly, the fire, all point to Melina. If the reading holds, then Messmer and Melina are brother and sister, two of Marika's fire-bearing children, each carrying a flame capable of burning one of the great trees. The parallel between them is striking and sad. Both were children of Marika with a vision of fire. Both carried a kindling, a flame meant to burn a tree. Melina's purpose was to burn the Erdtree, the act at the center of one of the game's endings. Messmer's flame could burn the sealing tree of the land of shadow. The two fire children, brother and sister, each bound to a tree and a burning, each carrying the destructive flame that Marika's vision of fire produced, and both, in their different ways, were instruments of purposes larger than themselves. Melina the kindling for the Erdtree's burning, Messmer the weapon of the Crusade. The fire that ran in Marika's line was a fire of purpose and sacrifice, and the children who bore it were bound to burnings they did not choose. The serpent beneath. Beneath the fire was something worse, and it is the curse that defined Messmer's whole existence. Messmer was born cursed, like several of Marika's children, but his curse was particular and terrible. Coiled within him from birth was a dark entity, an evil serpent, which Messmer would come to call the Abyssal Serpent. It writhed within his body, threatening to subsume him, to eat him from the inside, to consume him entirely and take his body for its own. He was born with this thing inside him, a malevolent power coiled in his flesh, a serpent of the abyss that threatened from his first moment to devour the child it inhabited. The nature of the Abyssal Serpent is one of the dark mysteries of the lore, and we will explore it in the next part. For now, what matters is that Messmer was born with it, that it was a threat from his birth, that it coiled within him as a constant danger of being consumed. The firstborn son of Marika, the child with the vision of fire, carried within him from his first breath a serpent that threatened to eat him alive, a curse coiled in his flesh that would shadow his entire existence. The curse connects Messmer to his siblings in a way that is worth marking. Several of Marika's children were born cursed. Malenia carried the scarlet rot from birth. Michaela was cursed to remain forever a child. Morg and Morgoth were born omen, marked by the Hornsent curse, and Messmer was born with the Abyssal Serpent coiled within him. The children of Marika were, again and again, born afflicted, marked from birth by curses that defined and limited and threatened them. Whatever Marika was, whatever the nature of her line and her bargain with the greater will, her children paid for it in the curses they carried. Messmer's serpent was one more affliction in a family of the afflicted, one more child of the Eternal Queen, born with a curse coiled in his flesh. Marika's response to this curse was the act that would mark Messmer for life, and it is one of the most striking images in all the lore. To contain the serpent, to suppress its power and keep it from consuming her son and threatening her reign. Marika removed one of Messmer's eyes. She plucked out his right eye and replaced it with a seal of her grace, a golden scar seal that contained the Abyssal Serpent, kept it suppressed, held it down within Messmer's body so that it could not rise up and consume him or escape into the world. The seal of grace in the place of his eye was the lid on the serpent, the golden stopper that kept the abyss contained. The eye of grace. The image of the sealed eye deserves a moment because it captures so much of Messmer's nature and his relationship to his mother. His right eye was gone, removed by his mother, and in its place was a seal of grace. The golden light of the Erdtree's blessing set into his face as a stopper on the darkness within him. He saw the world through one natural eye and one eye of grace, the seal that held the serpent down. The grace that was for the rest of the Golden Order a blessing and a guidance was for Messmer a lid on a curse, a containment, the golden light pressed into his skull to keep the abyss from rising. There is a doubleness in this that runs through everything about Messmer and his mother. The removal of the eye was an act of suppression, of violence done to the child, the plucking out of an eye and the sealing of a curse. And it was also, in its way, an act of protection, the thing that kept the serpent from consuming Messmer, the seal that let him live rather than be eaten from within. Marika's act was both. She maimed her son and she saved him, suppressed his curse, and protected him from it. The same act of taking his eyes serving both to contain the threat he posed and to keep him alive against the serpent that would have devoured him. This doubleness is the pattern of Messmer's whole relationship to Marika. She used him and she made him. She abandoned him and she had once protected him. The crusade she sent him on was a use and a purpose both. The abandonment, a betrayal of a son who had served her. Throughout Messmer's story, Marika is both the mother who saved him from the serpent and the mother who used him as a weapon and threw him away, and the two are not separable. The eye of grace, the seal that maimed and protected at once, is the image of that inseparable doubleness. The mother's act that was cruelty and care in the same gesture. The serpent slept, suppressed beneath the eye of grace. The fire burned, hated and unquenchable. And the firstborn son of Marika, cursed and maimed and bearing a flame he despised, grew toward the purpose his mother would assign him. The crusade, the impaling, the long war in the land of shadow that would make him a symbol of fear and earn him the name by which the world would remember him. It is worth holding, before we go on, the picture of what Messmer was at the start. He was perhaps the firstborn of a god, the eldest son of the Eternal Queen, a child who might have been an heir. He bore the red hair of Radagon's line and the vision of fire that marked certain of Marika's children. And he was cursed, from his first breath, with a serpent that threatened to devour him, maimed by his mother to contain the curse, carrying a fire he hated and a serpent he feared. Before he had done anything, before the crusade or the impaling or the long war, Messmer was already a being defined by suffering and use, a cursed child, maimed to be contained, bearing powers he loathed, shaped from birth toward a purpose he had not chosen. This is the foundation of his tragedy. Messmer did not become a monster through his own choices, the way a villain does. He was born cursed, maimed by his mother, made into a weapon, and assigned a purpose of destruction that he carried out of loyalty and duty rather than malice. The fire he wielded against the Hornsent was a fire he despised. The serpent that made him fearsome was a curse he feared. The crusade he waged was his mother's will, not his own desire. From his first breath, Messmer was a being shaped by others toward ends he did not choose. The cursed firstborn made into a weapon and, in the end, thrown away. The child born with fire and a serpent was, before he had lived at all, already on the path to the bitter end that waited for him in the land of shadow. Sleep well. Tomorrow we descend into the nature of the Abyssal Serpent, the lightless thing coiled in Messmer's flesh, and what it might have been. Coiled within Messmer from his first breath was a thing the lore calls the Abyssal Serpent, the base serpent, the lightless thing of the depths. It was the deepest of his curses, the power beneath his fire, the entity his mother maimed him to contain. What it was, where it came from, and why Marika feared it so greatly that she would put out her son's eye to seal it, are among the dark mysteries of the shadow of the Erdtree. Tonight we descend into the serpent. We sit with the nature of the Abyssal Serpent, the friends who held it in check, and the lifelong war Messmer waged against the powers coiled in his own flesh. The base serpent. The serpent that lived in Messmer is named in the lore by several names, and each name tells us something about it. It is called the Abyssal Serpent, the name Messmer himself used for the thing within him. It is called the base serpent, where the word base carries the meaning of something low, ignoble, deficient in character, a baseness in the sense of the wicked and the debased. In the Japanese text, it is called the wicked snake or evil snake, and Messmer's own words for it translate as the lightless serpent of the abyss, the thing without light, the serpent of the depths that had never known illumination. The lore preserves a fragment of its history. Long ago, the Abyssal Serpent was a powerful snake in the lands between. It was separated from its light, though it is unclear by whom, when, or why. And once separated from its light, if it was not so already, it henceforth became a wicked entity. The serpent had been something once, a powerful snake, and it had been shorn of its light, divided from whatever illumination it had possessed, and the loss of light had made it wicked, a lightless thing of the abyss, an entity of darkness and hunger. There is a resonance in this with Messmer himself. The serpent was separated from its light and became wicked. Messmer carried within him a fire he hated and a serpent he feared, his own light, the vision of fire, set against the lightless thing in his depths. The seal Marika placed in his eye was a seal of grace, of golden light, holding down the lightless serpent. Messmer's whole nature was a contest of light and lightlessness, the fire and the grace against the abyss, the illuminated against the thing that had lost its light and turned wicked. He was a battleground between light and the lightless, the seal of grace in his eye, the front line of the war. What the serpent might be. The deeper question is what the Abyssal Serpent was, and here the lore offers a haunting possibility. Some readings hold that the serpent sealed within Messmer is connected to the Fell God, the outer god of fire worshipped by the fire giants, the deity of flame that Marika had warred against in the founding of the Golden Order. The fire giants were the keepers of the flame of ruin, the fire that could burn the Erdtree, and Marika had warred against them, broken them, left a single fire giant as the last keeper of the flame. The Fell God was the outer god behind their fire, a cosmic power of flame that opposed the Golden Order. If the serpent in Messmer is connected to the Fell God, then Marika's fear of it becomes comprehensible in a new way. She had already warred against the Fell God's fire, broken the fire giants, suppressed the flame of ruin that could burn her Erdtree. To have that same power, or something like it, coiled within her own son, would be to carry the enemy she had defeated inside her own child. The seal in Messmer's eye would be not only the containment of a curse, but the suppression of a cosmic enemy, the Fell God's power held down within the body of Marika's son, the defeated fire of the outer god, sealed in the flesh of the Eternal Queen's child. This reading connects Messmer's fire to the serpent in a meaningful way. Messmer bore a vision of fire that he hated. He carried a serpent connected, perhaps, to the outer god of fire. The fire and the serpent may be aspects of the same cosmic power. The Fell God's flame expressed in Messmer's vision of fire and coiled in his depths as the Abyssal Serpent. Messmer hated his fire and feared his serpent because both were, perhaps, the power of an outer god that his mother had defeated and sealed within him, the enemy of the Golden Order carried in the body of one of the Golden Order's own children. The lore does not confirm this, and the mystery remains. The Abyssal Serpent may be the Fell God, or connected to it, or something else entirely, a separate power with its own dark history. What is certain is that Marika feared it greatly, that she maimed her son to seal it, that it threatened to consume him and to pose a danger to her reign. Whatever its precise nature, the serpent was a cosmic threat, a power great enough that the Eternal Queen put out her son's eye to contain it, and, in the end, may have abandoned him in the land of shadow in part to keep the serpent from returning to the lands between. The slow devouring. The serpent did not only threaten Messmer in a single moment, it worked on him across his whole existence, slowly and without pause, eating away at him from within. The lore describes the mechanism. The Abyssal Serpent slowly consumed Messmer's kindling, the inner fire, the vital essence that Messmer carried. The serpent fed on him, devoured him by degrees, consumed the fire and the life within him across the long span of his existence. It was not a curse that struck once and was done. It was a slow devouring, a patient consumption. The serpent eating Messmer from the inside across all the years of his crusade and his abandonment. This slow devouring gives Messmer's whole existence a quality of gradual loss. He was being eaten, slowly, by the thing within him. His inner fire consumed by the serpent across the ages. Every year of his long crusade, every year of his abandonment in the land of shadow, was a year of the serpent feeding on him, eating away at the kindling, consuming him by degrees. He was a being slowly losing himself to the curse within him, the serpent devouring him across the eternity of his exile. What held the serpent in check, beyond the seal of grace in his eye, were his companions, and they are one of the few warm things in Messmer's story. Ever since his accursed birth, Messmer was in the constant company of the winged serpents, friends who suppressed the base serpent. The winged serpents were his lifelong companions, present from his birth, friends who helped hold the Abyssal Serpent in check, whose presence limited the influence of the base serpent and slowed its consumption of him. Messmer, the cursed and maimed and abandoned son, was not entirely alone. He had the winged serpents, his friends from birth, who held back the darkness within him and kept him company through the long crusade and the long abandonment. There is a tenderness in the image of the winged serpents that is worth dwelling on, because it stands against so much of the bleakness of Messmer's story. Here was a being cursed from birth, maimed by his mother, made into a weapon, abandoned and erased. And yet from his first breath he had companions, the winged serpents, friends who stayed with him, who suppressed the darkness within him, who kept him company through everything. The serpents were not the Abyssal Serpent, the wicked thing coiled in his depths. They were winged, creatures of the air and perhaps of some light, friends who opposed the base serpent and held it back. In a story of use and abandonment, the winged serpents are a thread of constancy, the companions who did not abandon Messmer, who stayed with him through the crusade and the exile, who held back the darkness and gave the lonely son some company in his long suffering. That the serpents were both his curse and his companions, the Abyssal Serpent his affliction, and the winged serpents his friends, captures something of the doubleness that runs through Messmer. Serpents were the thing that threatened to devour him, and the thing that kept him company. The same animal form held his deepest curse and his truest friends. Messmer, the serpent-cursed son, was also the serpent companion's son, surrounded by the winged friends who held back the abyssal enemy. The serpents were his torment and his solace both, the curse and the comfort, the thing that ate him and the things that kept the eating at bay. The threat to the rain. There is a dimension of the serpent that reaches beyond Messmer himself, into the politics of Marika's rule, and it deepens the cruelty of what was done to him. The lore notes that Messmer was cursed at birth by a threat to Marika's power. The serpent within him was not only a danger to Messmer, it was a danger to Marika's reign, a power that, if unleashed, could threaten the eternal queen's rule over the lands between. Whether because the serpent was connected to the fell god she had defeated, or because its power was great enough to rival hers, the serpent in Messmer was a political threat as much as a personal curse, a coiled power that could endanger Marika's dominion if it ever rose. This cast Marika's sealing of the serpent in a colder light. When she put out Messmer's eye and set the seal of grace in the socket, she was protecting her son from being consumed, yes, but she was also protecting herself, her reign, her dominion, from the threat the serpent posed. The maiming was an act of self-protection as much as of care, the Eternal Queen securing her rule by sealing the dangerous power within her child. Messmer's eye was the price of containing a threat to Marika's throne, and the son paid that price with his body, so the mother could keep her power secure. And this, the law suggests, is part of why she abandoned him in the land of shadow. To leave Messmer in a realm cut off from the lands between was to keep the serpent away from her dominion. If the serpent ever broke free, it would break free in the land of shadow, sealed away from the lands between, unable to threaten Marika's reign. The abandonment was, among its other motives, a quarantine, the removal of the dangerous son to a place where the danger he carried could not reach the Queen's throne. Messmer was exiled in part because the threat coiled within him was a threat to his mother's power, and keeping him far away kept the threat far away too. The pattern that emerges is bleak. From his birth, Messmer's value and his danger to Marika were bound together. He was useful as a weapon, his fire and his fearsomeness serving her crusade. He was dangerous as a vessel, the serpent within him threatening her reign. And Marika managed both the usefulness and the danger by the same means. She used him as a weapon while he was useful, and she contained and then exiled him to manage the danger. Messmer was, to his mother, both an asset and a liability, and she handled him as a ruler handles an asset that is also a liability, using him while sealing him, deploying him while keeping him at a distance, and discarding him when the liability outweighed the use. The war within. Gathering this together, we can see the war that Messmer waged within himself, and it is the deepest of all his wars. Messmer was at war with his own fire, which he hated and wished to be rid of and could not extinguish. He was at war with the serpent within him, which threatened to consume him, and which the seal of grace and the winged serpents held in check. He was a being divided against himself, carrying powers he loathed and feared, his own flesh a battleground between the fire he despised, the serpent he dreaded, the grace that sealed the serpent, and the friends who held it back. Before Messmer ever fought the Hornsent or faced the Tarnished, he was fighting the longest war of his life, the war against the powers coiled in his own body. This inner war is the heart of Messmer's character, and it is what makes him more than the Impaler, more than the symbol of fear, more than the villain of the Crusade. He was a being suffering from his first breath, the affliction of carrying within him powers he did not want and could not master. The fire that made him a weapon was a fire he hated. The serpent that made him fearsome was a curse that ate him alive. The grace that should have been a blessing was, for him, a seal in the socket of a plucked-out eye. Everything about Messmer's nature was a suffering, a war within, a contest of powers that gave him no peace. And the cruelty is that this suffering made him useful. The fire he hated was the weapon of the Crusade. The fearsome aspect the serpent gave him made him a symbol of terror. His mother took the powers that tormented him and made them serve her purpose, turned his curse into a crusade, his affliction into a weapon. Messmer suffered the war within, and his mother used the products of that suffering, the fire and the fearsomeness, to wage the war without. The son at war with himself was made into the instrument of his mother's war against the Hornsent, his inner torment harnessed to her outer purpose. There is a final bitterness in the inner war, and it concerns how it would end. Messmer hated his fire and feared his serpent, and he spent his existence holding both in check, suppressing the serpent with the seal of grace and the winged serpents, wielding the hated fire only because his mother's crusade required it. He kept the war within him in a kind of balance, the powers contained, the serpent held back, the fire controlled, and in the end, in his final battle, he would break that balance himself. Facing the tarnished, abandoned by his mother, desperate and despairing, Messmer would tear out the seal of grace, the eye his mother had set, and unleash the Abyssal Serpent he had spent his life suppressing. The war within, held in check for an eternity, would end with Messmer himself releasing the serpent, embracing the curse he had feared, in the bitter knowledge that the mother who sealed it had abandoned him. But that is the final part. For now, the war within continues, held in its long balance, the fire hated, the serpent feared, the seal in place, the winged serpents keeping their constant company. The picture to hold from this part is of a being whose deepest battle was with himself. Before the Hornsent, before the tarnished, before any external enemy, Messmer fought the powers in his own flesh, the fire and the serpent, the hated flame and the lightless thing of the abyss. He was a being made of contained catastrophe, a walking suppression, a sun whose every moment was the holding down of powers that wanted to consume him and the world. That he held them down for so long, across the eternity of his crusade and his abandonment, is its own kind of endurance, the endurance of a being who carried catastrophe within him and kept it contained out of duty and will, until the abandonment broke him and he let the catastrophe loose. Sleep well. Tomorrow we learn why the crusade was waged, what the Hornsent had done, and the old wound in Marika's past that turned into a war of fire and impaling. Messmer's crusade did not begin with Messmer. It began with a wound in his mother's past, a crime done to her people before she was a goddess, a horror committed in the land of shadow by the Horned people who ruled it. To understand why Marika sent her cursed son to burn the Hornsent and impale them on stakes, we have to understand what the Hornsent had done and what Marika had been before she was a queen. The crusade was vengeance, and the vengeance was old. Tonight we sit with the shaman village, the cruelty of the Hornsent, and the old wound that turned into a war of fire and impaling. The shaman of the village. Before Marika was the eternal queen, before the Erdtree and the Golden Order, she was a shaman of a village in the land of shadow. Marika came from the shaman village in the Skadu view, a settlement of her people, the shamans, in the realm that would later be hidden as the land of shadow. Her people had a particular nature, an affinity for trees and flesh that melded harmoniously with that of others, a quality of their bodies and their being that set them apart. They were a people of the land of shadow, living under the rule of the dominant power of that realm, the Horned people called the Hornsent. This is the origin the shadow of the Erdtree revealed, and it recast everything about Marika, the goddess who ruled the lands between, who grew the Erdtree and founded the Golden Order, had begun as a shaman of a small village, a member of a subject people living under the Hornsent. She was not born a queen. She was born a shaman, one of the people her village comprised, before whatever happened to that village and that people set her on the path to godhood and vengeance. The shamans were not the rulers of the land of shadow. The Hornsent were. The Horned people who revered the crucible, the primordial form of life from which the horns and the mixed features emerged, ruled the land of shadow and held the shamans and the other hornless peoples as their subjects, their lessers, the raw material for the cruelties their religion demanded. Marika the shaman lived under the Hornsent, one of a subject people, before the cruelty of the Hornsent gave her the wound that would become the Crusade. The cruelty of the jars. What the Hornsent did to the shamans is one of the darkest things in the lore, and it is the wound at the root of the Crusade. The Hornsent practiced a ritual they called sainthood, and the ritual was an atrocity. They believed that the hornless peoples, those without the marks of the crucible they revered, could be redeemed, reborn as better beings, made into saints, through a process of torture and death and rebirth in jars. The lore describes it plainly. The Hornsent tortured and sliced up shamans before stuffing them into the jars to be reborn as saints. They butchered the shamans, cut them apart with cruel tools, reduced them to pulp, and stuffed the remains into great jars in the belief that the process would rebirth them as saints, redeemed beings purified of their hornless blasphemy. The horror is compounded by the religious framing. The Hornsent did not see this as murder. They saw it as redemption, a divine ritual, the rebirth of the unworthy into sainthood. The shamans, by the Hornsent's reckoning, carried the blessing of gold, the primordial flow of the crucible, and this was a blasphemy in the hornless that could be redeemed through suitable penance. The penance was the torture and the jars. The Hornsent tortured Marika's people to pulp, harvested the essence of gold from within them, and stuffed them into jars, all in the name of a divine ritual of redemption. It was atrocity dressed as salvation, the butchery of a people framed as their rebirth into something better. Marika's village was subjected to this. Her people, the shamans of her village, were tortured and butchered and stuffed into jars by the Hornsent in the ritual of sainthood. The lore implies that Marika watched this happen to her people, that the village she came from was destroyed in this way, that she was, perhaps, the survivor of a massacre, the shaman whose people were turned into living jars by the horned rulers of the land of shadow. The wound at the root of the Crusade was this. The Hornsent had butchered Marika's people, and Marika did not forget. The jars themselves persist in the world as a reminder of this horror, and they are among the strangest and saddest things in Elden Ring. The living jars, the great ceramic vessels with people inside them, appear across the lands between and the land of shadow, the descendants or the products of the Hornsent's sainthood rituals. They are, in the base game, often gentle figures, the jar people who live their strange lives in their ceramic bodies, the inheritors of a ritual that was meant to rebirth the butchered into saints. Behind their gentle presence is the atrocity that made them, the torture and the butchery and the stuffing of bodies into jars, the cruelty dressed as redemption that the Hornsent practiced on the hornless. That Marika came from a people subjected to this gives her whole story its shape. She was not born a tyrant. She was born a member of a butchered people, a shaman whose village was destroyed by the jars, a survivor of an atrocity. The goddess who would despise the omen and seal the rune of death and shatter the Elden Ring began as a victim, a shaman who watched her people tortured into jars by the horned rulers of her realm. Whatever Marika became, she became it out of a wound, the wound of the butchered village, the trauma of the jars, the survivor's hatred that would, generations later, send a cursed sun to burn the people who had filled them. The Crusade was the far end of a wound that began with Marika the shaman watching her people die. The path to godhood. What Marika did in response set her on the path from shaman to goddess, and the Crusade was the final expression of it. Marika was recognized by the Two Fingers as an Empyrean, a being with the potential for godhood, and she was given a shadow-bound beast, Malekith, as her faithful follower. Through means the lore describes as seduction and betrayal, she ascended to godhood at the gate of divinity atop the tower of Enir Ilim, the sacred tower of the Hornsent. She became a god, the vessel for the Elden Ring, the eternal queen. The shaman, whose people had been butchered, rose to become the divine ruler of the lands between. And there is a betrayal at the heart of this ascension that complicates the whole story. The lore indicates that Marika reached the gate of divinity atop Enir Ilim, the Hornsent's own sacred tower, which means she did not take it by force alone. There are hints of a former alliance, a period in which the shamans and the Hornsent were connected, in which Marika gained access to the Hornsent's sacred places before she turned on them. Marika betrayed the Hornsent, the lore says plainly. Whatever the relationship had been, Marika's ascension involved a betrayal of the Hornsent, the use of their sacred tower and their divine gate to achieve a godhood she would then turn against them. Once she was a god, Marika took her vengeance. She sealed the land of shadow, hiding the Hornsent's realm away in shadow, cutting it off from the lands between. She sealed Enir Ilim, the sacred tower, shrouding it in shadow. And she sent her son Messmer on a crusade into the lands of the Hornsent, a cleansing by fire, a war to exterminate the people who had butchered her own. The shaman, who had survived the jars, became the goddess who sent fire against the people who had filled them. The crusade was Marika's vengeance, delivered by her cursed son, against the Hornsent who had destroyed her village and her people. It is worth pausing on the moral shape of this, because the shadow of the Erdtree refuses to make it simple, and the refusal is part of what makes the story powerful. The Hornsent were not innocent victims. They had butchered Marika's people, tortured shamans into jars, committed atrocities in the name of their religion. They were, by any measure, cruel, a people who reduced the Hornless to pulp and called it redemption. Marika's vengeance against them was not the persecution of innocence. It was the answer to a genuine atrocity, the response of a survivor to the people who had destroyed her village. And yet the vengeance became an atrocity of its own. The crusade Messmer waged did not only punish the guilty, it exterminated a people, burned their lands, impaled their bodies, devastated the land of shadow in a campaign of extermination that matched and exceeded the cruelty it answered. The Hornsent had butchered a village. Marika, through Messmer, butchered a civilization. The wound was real, and the vengeance was monstrous, and both things are true at once. This is the moral shape the lore insists on. Not a war of good against evil, but a war of atrocity against atrocity. The cruel Hornsent and the vengeful Golden Order each committing horrors, each with their grievances, each slave to forces and hatreds greater than themselves. There is no clean side in the crusade, only the old wound and the monstrous answer, the butchered village and the exterminated people, cruelty answering cruelty across the generations. And in the middle of it stood Messmer, who chose none of it. He had not been butchered by the Hornsent. He had not ascended through betrayal. He carried his mother's vengeance without having suffered the wound that justified it, waging a war of extermination against a people whose crime had been against his mother, not against him. Messmer was the instrument of a vengeance that was not his own, the deliverer of an atrocity in answer to a wound he had not received. He burned the Hornsent because his mother commanded it, carried out the extermination because it was his purpose, became the monster of the Crusade in service of a grievance that belonged to Marika and not to him. The Tower of Corpses. To understand what the Hornsent were and what Messmer was sent to destroy, it helps to look at their great work, the Tower of Ener-Ilim, because it embodies everything about them. Ener-Ilim was the sacred tower of the Hornsent, a great spire reaching toward the heavens, built in the pursuit of divinity. The Hornsent sought to reach the gods, to ascend, to climb toward the divine through the tower they raised ever higher. The law preserves their belief. The spiral is a normalized crucible current that one day will form a column that stretches to the gods. The tower was their ladder to divinity, the spiraling column by which they meant to reach the heavens and the gods above. And the tower was built of corpses. The pillars of Ener-Ilim, when examined, appeared to be formed of calcified corpses, the bleached remains of the dead built into the structure of the sacred tower. The Hornsent had built their ladder to divinity out of the bodies of those they had deemed unworthy, the hornless and the lesser, the people they had tortured and killed in their rituals. The stolen divinity of those deemed unworthy, harvested through the jars and the sainthood rituals, formed the steps of the Hornsent's climb toward the gods. Those people formed the corpses, the calcified dead, the raw material of the tower that reached for divinity. This is the monument of the Hornsent, and it tells us who they were. A people who climbed toward the gods on a ladder of the dead, who harvested the divinity of those they tortured to fuel their own ascension, who built a sacred tower out of the corpses of the unworthy. The shamans of Marika's village were among the unworthy, the hornless, whose gold the Hornsent harvested, whose bodies fed the climb. Ener-Ilim was built, in part, on people like Marika's people, the butchered hornless whose stolen divinity formed the steps of the Hornsent spiral toward the gods. When Marika ascended at the gate of divinity atop Ener-Ilim, she ascended at the summit of this tower of corpses, the sacred place the Hornsent had built on the bodies of the people she came from. And when she sealed Ener-Ilim in shadow and sent Messmer to burn the Hornsent, she was destroying the people whose ladder of corpses had included her own. The Crusade was, among other things, the toppling of the Tower of the Dead, the burning of the people who had built their divinity on butchery, the answer of the survivor to the civilization that had made her people into steps. Land, the crucible and the curse. There is a thread connecting the Hornsent to Messmer's own curse, and to the curse of his brothers, that deepens the tragedy of the Crusade. The Hornsent revered the crucible, the primordial form of life from which horns and mixed features emerged. Their horns were the marks of the crucible they worshipped, the signs of the ancient power they held sacred. And the omen, Marika's own children Morgoth and Morg, were born with horns, the marks of the crucible, the very features the Hornsent revered. The curse that marked the omen was, in a sense, the resurfacing of the crucible that the Hornsent had worshipped, the horns that the Golden Order despised being the same horns the Hornsent held sacred. The lore suggests that Marika's hatred of the omen, her despite for the Horned Children, was connected to the Hornsent. The reason she hated the omen so greatly is that their crucible traits reminded her of the Hornsent, who revered signs of the crucible. The horns of her own children recalled the horned people who had butchered her village, and so Marika, who might have loved her omen children, instead despised them, cast them into the dark, because their horns were the horns of her enemies, the marks of the crucible the Hornsent had revered while they tortured her people into jars. This connects to Messmer in a complicated way. Messmer was not omen, but he was cursed, marked, afflicted, a son whose curse made him useful as a weapon. And the war he was sent to wage was a war against the Horn people, whose religion had produced the very curse marks Marika despised in her other children. The Crusade was, at its root, a war about the Crucible and the Horns, the Golden Order's hatred of the primordial features set against the Hornsent's reverence for them. Messmer, the cursed son, was sent to destroy the Horn people whose sacred crucible was the source of the curses that ran through Marika's afflicted children. The Crusade was a war of the new order against the old, the Golden Order's refined forms against the Hornsent's primordial crucible, fought by a cursed son against a horned people, all of it rooted in the old wound of the butchered village and the jars. Sleep well. Tomorrow we follow Messmer into the Crusade itself, the burning and the impaling, and the name the world would give the cursed son who waged his mother's war. Marika gave the command, and Messmer carried it out. A cleansing by fire, the extermination of the Hornsent, the burning of their lands, the toppling of their tower, the impaling of their bodies on stakes. Messmer waged this war for an eternity in the land of shadow, and it earned him the name by which he would be known and feared, the Impaler. Tonight we sit with the Crusade itself, the fire and the stakes, and the terrible symbol that the cursed son became. We follow Messmer into the war his mother gave him, and the name it made of him. The command. The Crusade began with a command from Marika, and the command was total. The law preserves its character in the words associated with Messmer's purpose. Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death. The Crusade was not a war of conquest or subjugation in the ordinary sense. It was a war of extermination. The Hornsent, who did not bear the grace of gold, who followed the Crucible rather than the Golden Order, were to be destroyed, all of them put to death by fire and stake. Marika had sealed their realm in shadow, and into that sealed realm she sent her son to exterminate the people who had butchered her own. Messmer was the commander of this crusade, the leader of the forces of the Erdtree sent into the land of shadow. The law names him plainly. Long ago, Queen Marika commanded Sir Messmer to purge the tower folk, a cleansing by fire. He led a host of the Erdtree into the land of shadow, the soldiers and knights and war machines of the Golden Order, to carry out the purge his mother had commanded. The cursed son became the general of his mother's vengeance, the commander of the cleansing, the leader of the war against the Hornsent. And he carried it out. Whatever Messmer felt about the fire he hated, and the purpose he had been given, he obeyed. He led the crusade, burned the Hornsent, toppled their settlements, impaled their bodies, devastated their lands. The loyal son did his mother's will, executed the command she had given, became the instrument of the extermination she desired. Messmer's obedience is one of the central facts of his character, and it runs through the whole crusade. He did what his mother commanded, however terrible, out of a loyalty that would persist even after she abandoned him. The obedience was not the obedience of a fanatic. Messmer did not burn the Hornsent out of zeal or hatred or belief in the rightness of the cause. He burned them because his mother commanded it, out of loyalty and duty, the obedience of a son who did his mother's will even when the will was terrible and the means were a fire he despised. This distinguishes Messmer from a true believer, from the zealot who exterminates out of conviction. He was a dutiful son carrying out a command, a loyal child executing his mother's vengeance, and the loyalty, rather than any zeal of his own, was what drove him to wage the crusade. He did terrible things out of love and duty toward his mother. not out of hatred toward the Hornsent, and the distinction is part of what makes him tragic rather than monstrous. The fire. The Crusade was a cleansing by fire, and the fire was Messmer's own. The flame he hated turned into the weapon of the war. Messmer bore the vision of fire, the flame that lived in him, the power he despised and could not extinguish. And this fire was the instrument of the Crusade. The cleansing by fire was a cleansing by Messmer's fire. The hated flame poured out against the Hornsent. The settlements burned, the land scorched, the people consumed in the flame that Messmer carried within him. The very power he most wished to be rid of was the power his mother's war required, and so he wielded it, burning the Hornsent with the fire he hated. There is a particular cruelty in this, the cruelty we touched on in the earlier parts. Messmer's suffering was his usefulness. He hated his fire, and his fire was the weapon. He was made to carry a flame he despised, and then made to use that despised flame to burn a people in his mother's name. The Crusade compelled Messmer to wield, again and again, across an eternity of war, the very power that tormented him, to express through fire against the Hornsent the flame he wished he could extinguish in himself. Every burning was the use of the hated fire, every scorched settlement an expression of the power Messmer loathed, the war a long compulsion to wield the thing he most wanted to be free of. The fire of the Crusade was terrible enough to mark the land of shadow forever. The Hornsent's hatred of the Erdtree, which persists into the time of the Tarnished, was born of this fire. It is no wonder the Hornsent holds the Erdtree in contempt, the lore says, given the cleansing by fire that Messmer brought against them. The fire burned not only the Hornsent's bodies and settlements, but their relationship to the Erdtree forever, making the Golden Order and its tree the eternal enemy of the people Messmer had burned. The Crusade's fire left a hatred that outlasted the burning. The Hornsent's contempt for the Erdtree, a permanent scar of the cleansing Messmer had brought. The impaling. The fire gave Messmer his power, but the stakes gave him his name. Messmer became known as the Impaler, Messmer the Impaler, for the practice that defined the terror of his crusade, the impaling of bodies on stakes. He impaled the Hornsent, raised their bodies on spikes, made of the impaled a symbol of the Crusade's terror. The lore and the imagery of the shadow of the Erdtree show the land of shadow marked by the impaled, the bodies raised on stakes as the signature of Messmer's war, the impaler's mark upon the lands he had conquered. The impaling was a symbol as much as a method. To impale the dead and raise them on stakes is to create a display, a warning, a monument of terror. Messmer the Impaler made of the Hornsent's bodies a forest of stakes, a landscape of the impaled, a terrible symbol that announced the Crusade's power and the fate of those who opposed the Golden Order. The name the Impaler captures this, the identity Messmer took on through the practice, the cursed sun, become the raiser of stakes, the maker of the impaled, the symbol of fear that the Crusade required. There is a question of why Messmer impaled, and the lore lets us consider it. The impaling served the Crusade's purpose of terror, the creation of a symbol that would break the Hornsent's will and announce the Golden Order's power. It may also have expressed something of Messmer himself, the rage or the despair of a being forced to wage a war he had not chosen, the impaling a savage expression of the violence he had been made to carry out. Or it may have been simple strategy, the calculated terror of a commander seeking to break an enemy. Whatever its root, the impaling became Messmer's signature, the practice that named him, the terrible mark of the Impaler upon the land of shadow. The image of the impaled runs through the land of shadow as the Tarnished explores it. bodies on stakes, the dead raised on spikes, the forest of the impaled that Messmer's crusade left behind. It is a landscape of terror, the visible record of the Impaler's war, the Hornsent dead displayed on their stakes across the realm Messmer had conquered. And Messmer himself wields the impaling in battle, fighting with spears and stakes of fire, impaling and burning, the two signatures of his crusade united in his combat. The impaling is not only the crusade's mark upon the land, it is Messmer's way of war, the method that defined him, the terrible practice the cursed son made his own across the eternity of the crusade. The divine beasts and the tower. The crusade did not only burn people, it destroyed the Hornsent's gods, their sacred places, their whole civilization, and the scale of the destruction is part of what made the crusade an extermination rather than a war. The Hornsent had their divine beasts, great sacred creatures they revered, the divine animals of their religion. Messmer's crusade killed them. The divine beast dancing lion, the great sacred lion of the Hornsent, and the other divine beasts were slain in the crusade, their sacred creatures destroyed along with their people. The crusade was not content to kill the Hornsent. It killed their gods, slaughtered the divine beasts they revered, tore down the sacred foundations of their civilization. To exterminate the Hornsent was to exterminate their religion, their gods, their sacred animals, the whole structure of their divine world. And the crusade toppled their tower. Ener Ilim, the sacred spire the Hornsent had built toward the gods, was sealed in shadow and, the lore suggests, broken in the crusade. Its climb toward divinity ended. Its sacred summit, where Marika had ascended, sealed away. Belurat, the tower settlement at the tower's base, was devastated, its people burned, its streets filled with the impaled. The great work of the Hornsent, the tower of corpses reaching toward the gods, was ended by the crusade, the spire sealed and broken, the settlement destroyed, the climb toward divinity halted by Messmer's fire. The completeness of this is what marks the Crusader's extermination. Messmer did not defeat the Hornsent. He destroyed them, their people, and their gods, and their tower, and their religion. The whole civilization reduced to ruins, and the impaled and the sealed tower in the shadow. The land of shadow that the Tarnished walks through is the wreckage of this. The devastated realm where the Hornsent's civilization once stood, marked everywhere by the Crusade's fire and the Impaler's stakes. Messmer's war did not subjugate a people. It ended one, and the ended civilization's ruins are the landscape of the land of shadow. The eternity of the war. There is a dimension of time to the Crusade that deepens its tragedy, and it concerns how long Messmer waged it. Messmer did not fight the Crusade and then return home. He waged it for an eternity, trapped in the land of shadow, fighting on across an immense span of time. Marika had sealed the realm and, as we will see, abandoned her son within it, and so Messmer's crusade became not a campaign with an end, but an endless war, a perpetual fighting in the sealed realm, a crusade that went on and on across the ages without resolution or return. The lore shows us a Messmer who has been fighting for so long that the war has become his entire existence, the eternal crusade in the sealed realm, his whole world. This eternity transforms the meaning of the crusade. A war that ends is a thing a soldier endures and survives. A war without end is a kind of damnation, a perpetual fighting that becomes the whole of existence. Messmer, abandoned in the sealed realm, waged his mother's war forever, the crusade becoming not a task he completed, but a condition he endured, an eternal fighting that consumed his existence as surely as the serpent within him consumed his fire. He fought and fought, across the ages, in the sealed realm, the war his whole world, the crusade his eternity, and he waited, through all of it, for his mother to return. This is the detail that breaks the heart of the crusade. Messmer did not only fight forever, he fought forever expecting his mother to come back, to summon him home, to release him from the sealed realm when the crusade was done. He kept faith, kept fighting, kept the war going in the belief that his mother would return for him. The eternity of the crusade was, for Messmer, an eternity of loyal waiting. The loyal son fighting his mother's war and waiting for the mother who had, in fact, abandoned and erased him, who was never going to return, who had sealed him in the shadow and struck his name from history. But that abandonment is the subject of a later part. For now, the crusade goes on, eternal in the sealed realm, the loyal son waging the endless war and waiting for the return that would never come. The symbol of fear. What Messmer became through the fire and the impaling was a symbol, and the nature of the symbol is the heart of this part of his tragedy. Messmer the Impaler was a figure of terror, a name to frighten, the monster of the crusade. To the Hornsent, he was the bringer of fire and stakes, the exterminator, the cursed son who burned their people and raised their bodies on spikes. To the lands between, in the rare mentions that survived Marika's erasure, he was the Impaler, the fearsome commander, the wielder of fire and the maker of the impaled. Messmer became a symbol of fear, an image of terror, the monster at the head of the crusade. And this symbol was made for him by his mother. Marika took her cursed son, with his hated fire and his fearsome serpent, and made of him a symbol of terror to serve her vengeance. The fearsome aspect that the serpent gave him, the fire that the crusade required, the impaling that announced the Golden Order's power, all of it made Messmer into the symbol of fear his mother's war needed. He did not choose to be a monster. He was made into one, shaped by his curse and his mother's command into the terrible figure of the Impaler, the symbol of fear that the crusade required him to be. This is the cruelty at the center of the crusade. Messmer became, in the eyes of the world, a monster, the Impaler, the bringer of fire and stakes, and he became it not through his own malice, but through his mother's use of him. His curse and his obedience and his hated fire turned into the symbol of terror his mother's vengeance required. The world would remember Messmer in the fragments that survived as the Impaler, the monster of the crusade. It would not remember that he hated his fire, that he feared his serpent, that he waged the war out of loyalty to a mother who would abandon him. The symbol of fear was all that the world saw, and the suffering son behind the symbol was hidden, erased, forgotten, leaving only the Impaler, the monster his mother had made him. When the Tarnished at last meets Messmer, this gap between the symbol and the sun is the heart of the encounter. The Tarnished comes to him as the Impaler, the fearsome commander, the monster of the crusade, a boss to be fought and defeated. And what the Tarnished finds beneath the terror and the fire and the stakes is a being of sorrow, a son abandoned by his mother, a loyal commander waging an endless war for a queen who had erased him. The symbol of fear, met up close, is revealed as a tragedy, the monster as a victim, the Impaler as a son. Messmer's dialogue, his bearing, the grief beneath his power, all of it shows the suffering son behind the symbol of fear, the being the world remembered as a monster revealed as the most loyal and most abandoned of Marika's children. That is the achievement and the heartbreak of Messmer's story. He was made into a symbol of fear, the Impaler, the monster, and the truth beneath the symbol was a son who hated his fire, feared his serpent, waged his mother's war out of loyalty, and waited an eternity for a return that would never come. The Crusade made him a monster in the world's eyes. The law reveals the suffering son the monster had always been. The loyal, cursed child his mother used and abandoned and erased, leaving only the terrible symbol of the Impaler, where a grieving son had stood. Sleep well. Tomorrow we meet the others who waged the Crusade alongside Messmer, the brothers in arms whose bonds gave the cursed son something the war could not take from him. A being remembered as a monster is hard to see as a person, and Marika's erasure left Messmer remembered, where he was remembered at all, as the Impaler, the symbol of fear. But Messmer was not alone in his crusade, and the others who fought beside him, who knew him, who served and loved him, are the thread that reveals the person behind the symbol. Through the brothers in arms, the warriors who waged the crusade with Messmer, we see the cursed son not as a monster, but as a leader, a comrade, a brother loved by those who knew him. Tonight we sit with the companions of the crusade, the bonds that the war could not take from Messmer, and the warmth that survived even in the eternal war. The loyal knights. Messmer was a leader of men, and his soldiers were devoted to him. The crusade was waged by a host of the Erdtree, the soldiers and knights Messmer led into the land of shadow. These were his people, his army, the warriors who followed the cursed son into the eternal war. And they were loyal to him, devoted to their commander, bound to Messmer by the bonds that form between a leader and the soldiers who follow him through a long war. The lore shows us Messmer's knights and soldiers, the forces of the crusade, the people who served the Impaler, not out of fear, but out of devotion to a commander they followed and believed in. This is the first crack in the image of Messmer as a mere monster. A monster commands through fear. Messmer commanded through loyalty, leading an army that followed him with devotion through the eternal crusade. His soldiers were his, bound to him by the bonds of a shared war, devoted to a commander who led them and whom they followed. The symbol of fear, seen from within his own army, was a beloved leader, a commander his soldiers served with loyalty, the cursed son who had, in his army, a people who were his. There is one complication in this loyalty worth noting, because it touches Messmer's curse. The lore mentions a rebellion led by a knight named Andreas against Messmer, sparked by the discovery of his lord's serpentine nature. When some of Messmer's followers learned of the Abyssal Serpent within him, the serpentine curse he carried, they rebelled, unable to follow a lord revealed as a serpent-cursed being. The curse that Marika had sealed, the serpent within Messmer, was a thing that could turn his followers against him when they discovered it. The serpentine nature a horror that broke the loyalty of those who learned of it. Even among his own, Messmer's curse was a danger, a thing that could turn devotion into rebellion when revealed. This rebellion cast the serpent's curse in a social light, beyond the personal threat of being consumed. The serpent did not only threaten to eat Messmer from within, it threatened his place among his own people, his standing as a commander, the loyalty of his followers. To be revealed as serpent-cursed was to risk rebellion, the breaking of the bonds that made Messmer a leader. The curse isolated him in this way too, made him a being who had to hide his deepest nature even from his own soldiers, who could lose the loyalty he commanded if the truth of the serpent became known. Messmer carried his curse as a secret as well as a torment, a thing that could turn his own against him. One more burden of the serpent coiled in his flesh, that the serpent is associated in the culture of the Erdtree with betrayal deepens this. Serpents in the lands between became symbols of betrayal, the serpentine nature a mark of the traitor, after the betrayals of figures like the serpent god of Gelmir. For Messmer to be revealed as serpent cursed was for him to be marked in the eyes of his followers with the sign of betrayal, the serpentine nature that the culture associated with treachery. The curse made him, to those who discovered it, a figure of suspicion and betrayal, the serpent within him a mark that could turn loyal followers into rebels. Messmer, the most loyal of sons, carried within him the serpent that the world read as the sign of the traitor, one more cruel irony in the life of the loyal cursed son. Commander Gaius. Among the closest of Messmer's brothers in arms was Commander Gaius, and his story is one of shared affliction. Gaius was a commander of Messmer's Crusade, one of the leaders of the war, a warrior who fought beside Messmer in the Land of Shadow. And he was, like Messmer, a being marked by his birth. Gaius was an Albinauric, one of the artificially created people of the lands between, beings made rather than born in the ordinary way, who suffered for their nature, who were despised and hunted for being Albinaurics. The lore describes Gaius as having been cursed from birth, an Albinauric who carried the affliction of his kind, marked and suffering for what he was. This shared affliction connected Gaius to Messmer. Both were beings cursed or marked from birth, both afflicted, both suffering for a nature they had not chosen. Messmer carried the serpent and the hated fire. Gaius carried the curse of the Albinauric. They were brothers not only in arms, but in affliction. Two marked beings waging the crusade together, each understanding the other's suffering because each carried a curse of his own. The bond between them was the bond of the afflicted, the comradeship of those who shared the experience of being marked and despised for their birth. Gaius's loyalty to Messmer was deep. He fought the crusade beside him, served as one of his commanders, remained devoted to Messmer through the eternal war. When the Tarnished encounters Gaius in the Land of Shadow, he is still fighting, still loyal, still bound to the crusade and to Messmer. The bond between the two afflicted commanders persisted through everything. The comradeship of the cursed son and the cursed Albinauric, the brothers in affliction who waged the crusade together and remained loyal to each other through the eternal war. The lore gives Gaius a line that captures the bond and the shared affliction. He speaks of himself and Messmer as kindred, beings who understood each other through their shared curses, the two of them bound by the experience of being marked from birth. For Messmer, who carried the serpent and the hated fire, who could lose his followers' loyalty if the serpent were revealed, a comrade like Gaius, who shared the experience of affliction, would have been precious. Gaius did not need to discover Messmer's curse and rebel against it. He was cursed himself, marked himself, a being who understood from his own experience what it was to be afflicted from birth. The bond between them was the bond of mutual understanding. Two cursed beings who did not have to hide their afflictions from each other, who fought the crusade together as kindred in suffering. This is part of what made the brothers in arms so important to Messmer. Among most beings, his curse was a secret and a danger, a thing that could turn loyalty to rebellion. Among the afflicted like Gaius, the curse was a shared experience, a bond rather than a danger. Messmer could be, with Gaius, what he could not be with most, a cursed being among the cursed, an afflicted commander beside an afflicted commander, understood rather than feared. The comradeship of the afflicted gave Messmer a place where his curse was not a horror to be hidden, but a shared truth that bound him to his kindred. In Gaius, the cursed son found a brother who understood. The elder brother to Radan. There is a bond that reaches beyond the Land of Shadow, connecting Messmer to one of the great figures of the base game, and it is worth tracing because it humanizes Messmer through family. Radan, the mightiest of the demigods, the Red Lion General, was the one to whom Messmer acted as an elder brother. The lore draws a careful distinction here. Messmer behaved toward Radan as an older brother would, with the regard and the protectiveness of an elder sibling, and yet the lore notes that the two were not brothers in the strict sense. Messmer acted like an elder brother to Radan, but was not one, the difference lying in the particulars of their births among Marika's children. What is certain is that Messmer, born before Radan, took the role of an elder brother toward him, and that a bond formed between them across that role. And there are hints of a real bond. Messmer and Commander Gaius, the cursed Albinoric, both acted as older brothers to General Radan, the two afflicted commanders taking the younger demigod under their protection. Radan was the admired hero, the strongest demigod, beloved across the lands between. Messmer was the cursed son, abandoned and erased, the impaler of the sealed realm. And yet Messmer was an elder figure to Radan, a kind of brother in role if not in the strictest blood, and the connection between them, faint as the lore leaves it, is one more thread that ties Messmer to the family that Marika's erasure had cut him from. He was not only the impaler in the sealed realm, he was an elder brother to Radan, connected through that role to the family of Marika's children. The poignancy of this is in the contrast between their fates. Radan was the admired hero, remembered and sung of, the mighty general at the center of the base game story. Messmer was the erased son, struck from history, forgotten in the sealed realm. Two children of Marika, one remembered as the greatest hero and one erased entirely. The family that Marika built and broke contained both the celebrated Radan and the erased Messmer, the elder figure and the younger he had watched over, their fates diverging so far, the one remembered and the one forgotten, separated by the gulf that Marika's erasure had opened between them. There is a further connection that the lore draws between them, in their final fates, that deepens the parallel. Both Messmer and Radan ended as figures the Tarnished must face in the Land of Shadow, bound up with Miquella's plan. Radan was resurrected as Miquella's consort, his soul placed in Mohg's body, made the final boss of the shadow of the Erdtree. Messmer was the guardian of the Crusade's domain, the abandoned son waging the eternal war, another of the great figures the Tarnished confronts in the sealed realm. The celebrated hero and the erased elder brother both ended in the Land of Shadow, both caught up in the events that drew the Tarnished into the realm of shadow, their fates converging at last in the sealed land where Messmer had waged his eternal war. The bond between Messmer and Radan, faint as the lore leaves it, is one of the threads that ties Messmer back into the family he was erased from. He was not only the impaler, the symbol of fear, the forgotten son. He was an elder brother to Radan, connected by the role and perhaps by regard to the mightiest of the demigods, a member of the family of Marika's children, even after his mother had cut him from it. The erasure removed Messmer from the record, but it could not remove the bond, the role of the elder brother, the connection to Radan, and through him to the whole family. Messmer remained, beneath the erasure, a son of Marika and an elder figure to the demigods, the forgotten brother in all but name of the celebrated Radan. I'm my Lightless. Relana and the Crusade's reach. The Crusade drew warriors from across the lands between, and one of them, Relana, shows how far Messmer's war reached into the families and powers of the realm. Relana, Twin Moon Knight, was a sister of Renala of the Carrion royal family, and she came to the land of shadow as a knight of the Crusade. She was a warrior of great skill, a swordswoman who wielded twin blades and the sorcery of 2 moons, and she joined Messmer's crusade, fighting in the land of shadow as one of its knights. Her presence shows the crusade as a great undertaking that drew warriors from the noble houses of the lands between, a war that pulled in figures like Relana of the Carian line to fight alongside Messmer. Relana is remembered as one of Messmer's most trusted, a knight close to him, devoted to the crusade and to its commander. The lore suggests a bond between them, the kind of trust and regard that forms between a commander and a knight who serves him closely. She was one of the figures of the crusade who was Messmer's, a trusted knight, a warrior who fought beside him and held his regard. When the Tarnished faces Relana in the Land of Shadow, she fights as a guardian of the Crusade's domain, a knight still loyal to the war and its purpose, one more of the companions who were bound to Messmer and his crusade. The warriors of the crusade, gathered together, show the scale of what Messmer commanded. Gaius, the cursed Albinoric, Relana of the Carian line, the loyal knights and soldiers of the host, an army drawn from across the lands between, brought into the land of shadow to wage the eternal war, all of them following Messmer, all of them his. The cursed son, abandoned by his mother, commanded a great host of devoted warriors, the brothers and sisters in arms who waged the crusade with him and remained loyal through the eternal war. Chartiche. What the bonds mean. Gathering these companions together, we can see what they mean for Messmer's story, and it is something important. Messmer was abandoned by his mother, erased from history, remembered as a monster. If his story were only that, it would be a tragedy of pure isolation, a being used and discarded and forgotten with nothing to soften the bleakness. But the brothers in arms complicate the isolation. Messmer had companions, the winged serpents from his birth, the loyal soldiers of his army, the cursed Gaius who shared his affliction, the bond with Radan whom he watched over. He was abandoned by his mother, but he was not entirely alone. He had, in the crusade, people who were his, comrades who fought beside him, an army that followed him, a fellow cursed commander who understood him. This matters because it is the warmth in the cold story, the thing that makes Messmer's tragedy bearable to sit with. He was used and abandoned and erased, yes, but he was also a leader whom soldiers followed with devotion, a comrade to the afflicted Gaius, a brother to Radan, a lord whom his own served out of loyalty. The bonds of the crusade gave Messmer what his mother denied him, a place where he belonged, people who were his, companions who fought beside him and remained loyal through the eternal war. The mother abandoned him. The brothers in arms did not. There is a pattern here that runs through several of Marika's children. Mog, abandoned and despised, built a dynasty of followers who were his. Messmer, abandoned and erased, had the companions of the crusade who were his. The children Marika used and discarded, found in the people who served and loved them, the belonging their mother denied them. The bonds of the crusade were Messmer's belonging, the comradeship that the eternal war could not take from him, the warmth at the center of the cold tragedy of the abandoned son. He was erased by his mother. He was not erased by the brothers in arms who fought beside him and remained loyal to the end. Sleep well. Tomorrow we sit with the deepest cruelty of Messmer's tale, the role his mother assigned him beyond the crusade, the burden she laid on him to carry her sins as well as her vengeance. There is a role crueler than weapon, and Marika gave it to Messmer along with the crusade. She made him the bearer of her sins, the one who would carry the blame for what was done in the land of shadow, the scapegoat onto whom the maledictions and the grief and the ire of the wronged could be directed, so that they would fall on him and not on her. Messmer waged the crusade, yes, but he also carried, by his mother's design, the guilt of it, the hatred of it, the blame that should have fallen on the goddess who commanded it. Tonight we sit with the deepest cruelty of Messmer's tale, the burden of the scapegoat, the son made to carry his mother's sins. The words of the mother. There is a line associated with Marika and Messmer that captures the whole of what was done to him, and it is worth holding at the center of this part. The sentiment, preserved in the lore of Messmer and his crusade, runs, "Direct thy maledictions, thine ire, and thy grief towards me alone." It is the voice of the one who takes the blame, who asks that the curses and the anger and the sorrow of the wronged be directed at him and no other. On its face, it could be read as a noble thing, the willingness to bear the blame, to be the target of the hatred so that others are spared it. But in Messmer's story, the line carries a darker meaning, because the blame Messmer was made to bear was not his own. It was Marika's. Messmer waged the crusade, but the crusade was Marika's command, Marika's vengeance, Marika's war. The maledictions of the Hornsent, the ire of the wronged, the grief of the destroyed, should have been directed at Marika, the goddess who ordered the extermination, who sealed their realm, who sent the fire against them out of her own vengeance. Instead, they were directed at Messmer. He was the visible commander, the Impaler, the one who burned and impaled, and so the hatred fell on him, the blame attached to him, the maledictions and the ire and the grief gathered around the son who had carried out the war, rather than the mother who had commanded it. This was, the lore suggests, by design. Marika made Messmer the scapegoat, the one who would bear the blame for her vengeance, the visible monster onto whom the hatred could be directed, while the goddess who commanded the crusade remained above it. Messmer carried the maledictions, the ire, the grief, alone, so that Marika would not have to. The son bore the sins of the mother, the blame for the war she had ordered, the hatred of the people she had destroyed, all of it gathered onto Messmer the Impaler, while Marika, the goddess, stood clear of it. There is a reading of the line that makes it sadder still. The words "direct thy maledictions, thine ire, and thy grief towards me alone" may be Messmer's own, spoken by the son, rather than imposed by the mother. In this reading, Messmer himself asks to bear the blame, offers himself as the target of the hatred, takes the maledictions onto himself out of his own will. If the words are Messmer's, then the scapegoat role was not only imposed on him, but embraced by him, the loyal son volunteering to carry his mother's sins, asking that the hatred fall on him so that it would not fall on her. The devotion that made him wage the crusade also made him offer himself as its scapegoat, the son so loyal that he would ask to be hated in his mother's place. Either way, whether imposed or embraced, the result is the same. Messmer carries the blame for Marika's vengeance. If she imposed it, she used her son as a shield. If he embraced it, he loved her enough to be her shield. And in both readings, the cruelty is that the love or the obedience that made Messmer bear the blame was repaid with abandonment and erasure. Whether Marika made him the scapegoat or he offered himself as one, she took the offering and then abandoned the son who had made it, sealed him in the shadow with the blame he carried, erased him from the history he had taken the hatred to protect. The scapegoat, imposed or embraced, was abandoned all the same. the mechanism of blame. How a scapegoat works is worth understanding, because it illuminates the precision of the cruelty done to Messmer. A scapegoat is a being onto whom the sins of others are placed, who is made to carry the blame and the guilt that belong to someone else, who is then driven out or destroyed so that the community is purged of the sins it has loaded onto him. The mechanism requires that the scapegoat be visible, identifiable, a clear target for the blame, and that the true authors of the sin be hidden behind him. Messmer fit this perfectly. He was the visible commander of the Crusade, the Impaler, the one whose fire burned and whose stakes rose. He was the clear target, the identifiable monster, the one the hatred could attach to. And Marika, behind him, was hidden. The goddess who commanded the crusade remained above the blame, her vengeance carried out by the son who took the hatred for it. The Hornsent hated the Erdtree and Messmer, who had burned them, but the deeper author of their destruction, Marika, who had ordered the crusade out of her own vengeance, stood behind the scapegoat, shielded by him from the full force of the blame. Messmer was the lightning rod, drawing the hatred onto himself, and Marika was the protected structure behind him, spared the blame by the son who absorbed it. The erasure compounds this. Marika did not only make Messmer the scapegoat, she erased him, removed him from history, so that even the role of scapegoat was hidden. The world would not remember Messmer at all, would not know there had been a crusade, would not connect the destruction of the Hornsent to Marika or to anyone. The scapegoat was loaded with the blame and then erased, the sins placed on him, and then the bearer of the sins struck from the record, so that neither the true author nor the scapegoat remained in the world's memory. Marika's vengeance was carried out, the blame placed on Messmer, and then both the blame and its bearer erased, leaving the goddess clear of her own crusade in the most complete way possible. The burden of the sins. What it meant for Messmer to carry this burden is the heart of the tragedy, and it goes beyond the crusade itself. Messmer did not only wage a terrible war, he carried the guilt of it, the blame for it, the hatred of it, knowing perhaps that the war was his mother's and the blame was hers, but bearing it anyway because she had made him the scapegoat. He was the one who burned the Hornsent, who impaled them, who became the monster of the crusade, and he carried the weight of being that monster, the guilt and the blame and the hatred, even though the war was not his own desire, but his mother's command. He bore his mother's sins as if they were his own, carried the blame for a vengeance he had not wanted, became the hated impaler, so that his mother would not be the hated goddess. There is a particular cruelty in making a being carry guilt that is not his own. To do terrible things is one burden. To do them at another's command, and then to carry the blame for them while the commander goes free, is a deeper one. Messmer wielded the fire he hated, waged the war he had not chosen, and then bore the guilt of it alone. The scapegoat loaded with his mother's sins, hated for a vengeance that was hers. The crusade made him a monster in the world's eyes, and the scapegoat role made him carry the guilt of being that monster, even though the monstrousness was his mother's design and the guilt should have been hers, and he bore it out of loyalty. This is what makes it tragic rather than merely cruel. Messmer did not rebel against the role of scapegoat, did not refuse to carry his mother's sins, did not turn against the mother who had loaded the blame onto him. He bore it, accepted it, carried the maledictions and the ire and the grief out of loyalty to the mother who had made him bear them. The loyal son took up not only the crusade but the blame for it, not only the war but the guilt of it, out of a devotion to Marika that persisted even as she used him as the vessel for her sins. He loved her enough to be her scapegoat, to carry her guilt, to be hated in her place, and she repaid that love by erasing him. The pattern of the discarded. Messmer was not the only child Marika discarded, and seeing the scapegoat in the context of the others reveals a pattern that runs through the whole family. Marika's children were, again and again, used and discarded. The Omen twins, Morgott and Mog, were cast into the dark beneath Leyndell for the horns they were born with, hidden away so the realm would not know the queen had produced them. Messmer was sealed in the land of shadow and erased, made the scapegoat for his mother's vengeance. Each of these children was loaded with a burden that was not their fault, the curse they were born with, the blame for their mother's deeds, and then discarded, hidden or sealed or erased, so that the cost of Marika's choices would fall on them rather than on her. The connection between Messmer and the Omen is particularly close, because both involve the horns and the crucible, and Marika's hatred of them. The Omen were despised for their horns, the marks of the crucible the Hornsent had revered. Messmer was sent to destroy the Hornsent, whose crucible had produced those marks. Marika's hatred of the crucible, born of the Hornsent who had butchered her people, fell on her Omen children, who bore its marks and drove the crusade her cursed Messmer waged. The same wound, the Hornsent, and the jars in the crucible ran through the fates of both the Omen twins and Messmer, the children who bore the cost of their mother's vengeance and her hatred. What unites all these discarded children is that they carried, in their bodies or their roles, the consequences of Marika's choices. The Omen carried the crucible marks that recalled her enemies. Messmer carried the serpent that threatened her reign, and the blame for the crusade she commanded. They were the bearers of what Marika could not or would not bear herself, the children loaded with the curses and the sins and the costs of their mother's path to godhood, and her vengeance and her rule. And they were discarded, each of them, hidden or sealed or erased, so that the cost they carried would be hidden too. Messmer the scapegoat was one instance of a pattern, the child of Marika made to carry what the mother would not, and then discarded, so the carrying would be unseen. A Lord devoid of light. There is a phrase that hangs over Messmer's end, and it connects the scapegoat role to the curse and to what he would become, so it is worth introducing here. In his final moments, as we will see in the last part, Messmer becomes what the law calls a Lord devoid of light. The phrase describes what he becomes when he tears out the seal of grace and unleashes the Abyssal Serpent, the lightless thing of the abyss rising at last in the body of the abandoned sun. The serpent was the lightless one, separated from its light and turned wicked, and Messmer, in the end, becomes the lord of that lightlessness, the being devoid of light, the abandoned son who embraces the dark within him when the light of his mother's grace is torn away. The scapegoat role prepares this. Messmer carried his mother's sins, the darkness of her vengeance, the blame and the guilt and the hatred. He was loaded with darkness that was not his own, made to bear the lightless weight of his mother's deeds. And in the end, abandoned and despairing, he becomes the Lord devoid of light, the lightless serpent rising in him, the darkness he had carried for his mother, becoming the darkness he embodies. The scapegoat who bore his mother's sins becomes the Lord devoid of light, the bearer of darkness transformed into the embodiment of it, the lightless son who carried his mother's lightless deeds, becoming lightless himself at the last. There is a terrible logic to this. Messmer spent his existence carrying darkness for his mother, the sins and the blame and the guilt of her vengeance, while holding down the literal darkness of the serpent with the light of her grace. When she abandoned him, When the loyalty that had let him bear all of it broke, he tore out the light and let the darkness rise, became the Lord devoid of light, the bearer of his mother's darkness made into a being of darkness himself. The scapegoat who carried the lightless burden became at the end the lightless Lord, the darkness he had borne for his mother, consuming him at last, when she abandoned him to it. The deepest use. Gathering this together, we can see the full shape of how Marika used her son, and it is the deepest use of all. She used his body, maiming him to seal the serpent. She used his fire, the hated flame, as the weapon of the Crusade. She used his fearsomeness, the aspect the serpent gave him, to make him the symbol of terror. She used his obedience, his loyalty, to wage the war she commanded. And she used his very self as the vessel for her sins, the scapegoat who would carry the blame for her vengeance. Every part of Messmer was used. His body, his fire, his fear, his loyalty, his guilt. He was used entirely, consumed by his mother's purposes, the cursed son, made into the instrument and the scapegoat and the vessel of his mother's will. And the using did not stop at the Crusade. The scapegoat role meant that Messmer would carry the blame forever, would be the hated impaler in whatever memory survived, would bear the guilt of the Crusade across the eternity of his abandonment. He was not only used and discarded, he was used and discarded and left holding the blame, the scapegoat abandoned in the sealed realm with his mother's sins loaded onto him, carrying the guilt of a war he had not wanted for a mother who had erased him. The deepest use was this, that Messmer would carry his mother's sins forever alone, in the sealed realm, hated for her vengeance, loyal to her still. This is the burden Messmer bore beneath the Crusade, beneath the fire and the impaling and the symbol of fear. He carried his mother's sins. He was the scapegoat loaded with her guilt, the son made to bear the blame for her vengeance, the loyal child who took up not only the war, but the hatred of it, so that his mother would go free. And he bore it out of love, the love of a son for the mother who used him, the devotion that made him carry her sins and wait for her return, even as she abandoned him in the sealed realm with the blame she had placed on him. Sleep well. Tomorrow we sit with the abandonment itself, the mother who sealed her son away and cut him off and never returned, and the loyal impaler who waited for her through the eternity of the sealed realm. Marika gave Messmer the Crusade, the fire, the blame, the role of scapegoat, and then she gave him one thing more, the cruelest of all. She abandoned him. She sealed the land of shadow in the shadow of the Erdtree, cut off the realm where her son waged her war, and never returned. Messmer waged the crusade for an eternity, waiting for his mother to come back, keeping faith through the long ages of the sealed realm. And she never came. She had erased him, hidden him, left him to the eternal war and the slow devouring of the serpent, and she was never going to return for the loyal son who waited. Tonight we sit with the abandonment, the sealed realm, and the eternity of loyal waiting that defined the end of Messmer's existence. The sealing of the realm. The land of shadow was hidden away, and the hiding was Marika's act, and it sealed Messmer's fate. After the crusade, after the Hornsent were destroyed and their realm devastated, Marika sealed the land of shadow in the shadow of the Erdtree. The realm was hidden, removed from the lands between, concealed behind the great tree so that it could not be seen or reached, a sealed and shadowed place cut off from the world Marika ruled. The land of shadow became a hidden realm, sealed away, its existence unknown to the lands between, accessible only through the means that the shadow of the Erdtree would later reveal to the Tarnished, and Messmer was sealed within it. He did not return from the Crusade to the lands between. He remained in the land of shadow, sealed away with the realm he had conquered, confined to the hidden place behind the Erdtree. The Crusade had taken him into the land of shadow, and the sealing of the realm kept him there. The loyal son confined to the sealed realm, with the ruins of the people he had destroyed and the eternal war he continued to wage. The reasons for the sealing were several, and they all worked against Messmer. The serpent within him was a threat to Marika's reign, and keeping him in the sealed realm kept the threat away from the lands between. The Crusade and its atrocities were things Marika wished hidden, and sealing the realm hid them. The scapegoat loaded with her sins was best kept out of sight, and the sealed realm kept him out of sight. For every reason Marika had to seal the land of shadow, Messmer was the cost, the son confined to the hidden realm, so that the threat he carried and the sins he bore and the crusade he had waged would all be concealed behind the Erdtree. There is a connection here to the larger structure of the Golden Order that is worth noting, because it shows that Messmer's sealing was part of a pattern of things Marika hid in shadow. The land of shadow held more than Messmer. It held the gate of divinity where Marika had ascended, the truth of her origins as a shaman, the Hornsent she had betrayed and destroyed, the whole hidden history of how the Eternal Queen became what she was. Marika sealed the land of shadow to hide all of it, the origins and the betrayal and the crusade and the sun, the entire shadowed truth of her ascension concealed behind the Erdtree she had grown in the lands between. Messmer was part of this concealment, one of the truths sealed in the shadow. He was the living evidence of the crusade, the son who had waged the war, the bearer of the serpent and the blame. To seal him in the land of shadow was to seal away the evidence of what Marika had done, the son whose existence testified to the crusade and the vengeance and the atrocities. Marika hid her son in the shadow along with the rest of her hidden history, the firstborn sealed away with the gate of divinity and the betrayed Hornsent, and the whole shadowed truth of the goddess's origins. Messmer was not only abandoned, he was concealed, hidden in the shadow with the secrets of his mother's ascension. One more truth the Eternal Queen had buried behind the Erdtree. The cutting off. Marika did not only seal the realm, she cut off her son, severed the connection, abandoned him to the sealed place without return or contact. Messmer was left in the land of shadow, cut off from his mother, abandoned to the eternal war. Marika did not summon him home when the crusade was done. She did not return for him. She did not maintain the connection between the goddess in the lands between and the son in the sealed realm. She cut him off, severed him, left him alone in the hidden place with the war and the serpent and the blame she had loaded onto him. The abandonment was total, the goddess turning away from the son she had used, leaving him sealed in the shadow with no return and no contact and no acknowledgement. And she erased him, as we have seen. The cutting off was not only a severing of contact but an erasure from memory. The removal of Messmer from the history of the lands between. He was abandoned in the sealed realm and erased from the world, so that not only was he cut off from his mother, but he was cut off from existence itself, struck from the record, made into a son the world did not know it had. The abandonment and the erasure together made Messmer's isolation complete, sealed in the hidden realm, cut off from his mother, erased from history, alone with the eternal war and the slow devouring of the serpent. This is the depth of what Marika did. She did not only use her son and discard him. She sealed him away, cut him off, and erased him, leaving him alone in the hidden realm to wage the eternal war and carry the blame and be devoured by the serpent, while the world forgot he had ever existed. The abandonment was not a single act but a condition, the permanent state of the sealed and erased son, alone in the shadow, cut off from the mother and the world both. There is a contrast worth drawing here between Messmer's abandonment and the way Marika treated her other children, because it shows how complete Messmer's isolation was. The Omen twins were hidden beneath Leyndell, but they were in the lands between, in the city, part of the world, even in their imprisonment. Morgott would emerge to defend the Erdtree. Mog would build his dynasty. The other demigods, whatever their fates, remained in the world, remembered, part of the history of the lands between. Messmer alone was sealed in a hidden realm and erased from history, cut off not only from his mother, but from the world and the family and the memory of the lands between. His abandonment was the most complete of all Marika's children, the only one sealed in a separate realm and struck from the record, the only one whose very existence was hidden from the world. The loneliness of this is hard to overstate. Messmer was not imprisoned in the world, like the Omen, or defeated in the world, like the demigods of the Shattering. He was removed from the world, sealed in a realm behind the Erdtree, erased from the history of the lands between. He existed for the long ages of the sealed realm, in a place the world did not know, waging a war the world did not remember, waiting for a mother the world did not know he had. His isolation was not the isolation of a prisoner among other prisoners, but the isolation of the erased, the son removed from existence itself, alone in a hidden realm that the world had forgotten or never known. No other child of Marika was abandoned so wholly, sealed and erased and removed from the world, alone in the shadow with the eternal war and the slow serpent and the endless waiting. The eternity of waiting. And here is the detail that breaks the heart of Messmer's story. Through all of it, he waited for her. Messmer did not know, or did not accept, that he had been abandoned. He waged the crusade and waited for his mother to return, kept faith through the long ages, continued the war in the belief or the hope that Marika would come back for him. The loyal son, sealed in the shadow, cut off and erased, waged his mother's war and waited for his mother, the eternity of the crusade, an eternity of loyal waiting, the hope of return sustaining him through the long ages of the sealed realm. There is a terrible faithfulness in this. Messmer had every reason to despair, every reason to turn against the mother who had sealed and abandoned and erased him. And he did not. He kept faith, waged the war, waited for her return, loyal to the mother who had given him nothing but use and abandonment. The loyalty that had let him wage the crusade and bear the blame also let him wait, through the eternity of the sealed realm, for a mother who was never going to return. He loved her enough to wait forever, and she had abandoned him forever, and the gap between his faithfulness and her abandonment is the heart of his tragedy. What sustained the waiting was the loyalty, the love, the faith of a son for his mother. Messmer could not or would not believe that his mother had abandoned him entirely. He waged her war and waited for her return, holding to the belief that she would come back, that the crusade would end, that the mother who had sealed him away would one day summon him home. The faith was misplaced. Marika was never going to return. But the faith sustained Messmer through the eternity of the sealed realm, the loyal son waging the endless war and waiting, against all the evidence, for the mother who had erased him. Consider what the eternity of waiting meant in practice. Messmer did not wait a year, or a decade, or a lifetime. He waited across an immense span of time, the eternity of the sealed realm, an age so long that the world outside had risen and fallen and forgotten him. Through all of it, he held his post, waged the war, waited. The serpent within him devoured his fire by slow degrees across the ages, eating away at him as he waited. His companions, the winged serpents and the loyal commanders, kept their long company, and Messmer waited, year after year after year, age after age, for a mother who had sealed him away and erased him, and was never going to return. The waiting was not a moment of hope, but a condition of existence, the permanent state of the loyal son, holding his post in the sealed realm, across an eternity of abandonment. The image of this is one of the saddest in all the lore. A son, sealed in a hidden realm, waging an endless war, devoured slowly by a serpent within him, waiting across the ages for a mother who would never come. He had been the firstborn, perhaps, the eldest son of the eternal queen. He had been maimed to seal his curse, made into a weapon, loaded with the blame for his mother's vengeance, and then sealed away and erased. And through all of it, he waited, loyal to the end, faithful to a mother who had given him nothing but use and abandonment, holding his post in the sealed realm, across an eternity of waiting for a return that would never come. The loyal son, alone in the shadow, waiting forever for the mother who had forsaken him. Did he know? A question hangs over Messmer's waiting, and the lore leaves it open in a way that deepens the tragedy whichever way it falls. Did Messmer know he had been abandoned? One reading is that Messmer did not know, that he believed his mother would return, that he waged the crusade and waited in genuine hope, sustained by a faith that Marika would come back for him. In this reading, the abandonment was a thing Messmer did not accept or did not perceive. The loyal son, waiting in hope for a return he believed was coming. His faith intact, his loyalty rewarded in his own mind by the expectation of his mother's return. The tragedy in this reading is the tragedy of the deceived, the son who waited in hope for a mother who was never coming, his faith a comfort built on a lie. Another reading is that Messmer knew that somewhere in the eternity of the sealed realm, he came to understand that his mother had abandoned him, that the return would never come, that he had been sealed and erased and left alone forever. In this reading, Messmer waged the crusade and waited not in hope, but in a kind of loyal despair, continuing the war and holding his post, even though he knew his mother had abandoned him, faithful to a duty whose author had forsaken him. The tragedy in this reading is the tragedy of the knowing, the son who understood he had been abandoned and remained loyal anyway, who held his post in the sealed realm out of a devotion that survived the knowledge of his abandonment. There are signs in the lore that point toward the second reading that Messmer knew. His bearing when the tarnished meets him is one of sorrow, of grief, of a being who carries a deep sadness rather than a hopeful expectation. He does not seem to be waiting in eager hope for his mother's return. He seems to be enduring, holding his post, carrying a grief that suggests he understood what had been done to him. And his final words, as we will see, are the words of a son who knows his mother abandoned him, who curses her in his dying breath, which suggests that the knowledge of the abandonment was in him, perhaps for a long time, perhaps across the eternity of the sealed realm. If Messmer knew, then his loyalty becomes almost unbearable in its faithfulness. To wage your mother's war for an eternity knowing she has abandoned you, holding your post in the sealed realm out of a devotion that survives the knowledge of your abandonment, is a loyalty beyond reason, the faithfulness of a son who could not stop loving the mother who had forsaken him, even when he knew she had forsaken him. The loyal son waged the eternal war and carried the blame and held his post in the sealed realm, knowing, perhaps, the whole time, that the mother he served had abandoned and erased him, and remaining loyal anyway, unable to abandon the mother who had abandoned him. The Tarnished comes into the sealed realm. After the long ages of waiting came the Tarnished, and the coming was the beginning of the end of Messmer's waiting. The Tarnished entered the land of shadow in pursuit of Miquella, following the trail of the gentle Empyrean into the hidden realm. And in the land of shadow, the Tarnished found Messmer, the abandoned son, the loyal Impaler, waging his eternal war and waiting for the mother would not return. The Tarnished came not as the mother Messmer waited for, but as an intruder, a challenger, a threat to the sealed realm and its guardian. For Messmer, the coming of the Tarnished was not the return he had waited for. It was the opposite, the arrival of an enemy where he had hoped for his mother, a challenger come to the sealed realm where he waged the eternal war. The loyal son, waiting through the ages for his mother's return, found instead the Tarnished, the intruder who would face him in battle, the challenger whose coming would force the end of the waiting and the revelation of the truth Messmer had not let himself accept. And the truth was waiting in the encounter. To face the Tarnished was to confront the end of the Crusade, the breaking of the waiting, the moment when the loyal son would have to reckon with the fact that his mother was not coming, that the return he had waited for would never arrive, that he had been abandoned and erased and left alone in the sealed realm forever. The coming of the Tarnished was the beginning of that reckoning, the arrival that would force Messmer to face the abandonment he had refused to accept, the intruder whose challenge would end the eternity of waiting and bring the loyal son at last to the truth of what his mother had done. Sleep well. Tomorrow, in the final part, we sit with the end, the battle, the tearing out of the seal, the rising of the serpent, and the loyal son's last reckoning with the mother who abandoned him. We have followed Messmer from his birth with fire and a serpent, through the maiming that sealed his curse, the crusade that made him the Impaler, the brothers in arms who gave him belonging, the scapegoat role that loaded him with his mother's sins, and the abandonment that sealed him in the shadow to wait an eternity for a mother who would never return. Now we come to the end, the battle in the Shadow Keep, the tearing out of the seal, the rising of the serpent, and the loyal son's last reckoning with the truth he had refused to accept. Messmer dies in this part, and in his dying, he does the one thing he had never done across the eternity of his loyalty. He curses his mother by name. Tonight, in this final part, we sit with the end of Messmer the Impaler and gather what his whole story means. The intruder in the keep. The Tarnished came to the Shadow Keep, Messmer's stronghold in the land of shadow, and the winged serpents announced the intrusion. Messmer's serpents, his companions from birth, noticed the intruder and identified them as a Tarnished champion, a pretender to the title of Elden Lord come to the sealed realm. Messmer was surprised that a Tarnished had come to the land of shadow, surprised that anyone had reached the hidden realm where he waged his eternal war. But his surprise did not change his purpose. He met the Tarnished as he met all who came against the Crusade, as an enemy to be purged, a graceless one to meet death in the embrace of his flame. His words of greeting carry the whole weight of his unchanged purpose across the eternity of the sealed realm. He named the intruder and declared his resolve. A mongrel intruder, a tarnished, come to the sealed realm, and yet his purpose stood unchanged. Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death in the embrace of Messmer's flame. After an eternity of waiting, after the abandonment and the erasure, Messmer's purpose remained what his mother had given him: the purge, the death of the graceless, the crusade that he would wage to the end even in the sealed realm his mother had abandoned him to. The loyal son held to his purpose, waged the war, met the intruder with the fire and the resolve of the crusade his mother had commanded. The tearing of the seal. The tarnished proved a match for Messmer, and in the struggle came the moment that defined his end. Messmer struggled to overcome the tarnished. The intruder was a champion, a warrior capable of facing the demigod, and Messmer found himself unable to bring the tarnished down with the fire and the impaling of the crusade. And in that struggle, facing defeat, came the words that named the heart of his tragedy. "I will not suffer," Messmer said, "a lord devoid of light. O mother, forgive me." This is the moment Messmer tears out the seal. Unwilling to accept defeat as a lord devoid of light, desperate to regain the upper hand, he ripped out Marika's seal, the seal of grace, in the socket of his plucked out eye, and unleashed the power of the Abyssal Serpent he had spent his existence containing. The seal his mother had set to contain the serpent, the eye she had taken to protect him and her reign. Messmer tore out himself, releasing the lightless thing of the abyss, embracing the curse he had feared, becoming the serpent he had held down across the eternity of the crusade. The words that accompany this are heavy with meaning. "O mother, forgive me." Even in the act of tearing out his mother's seal, even in unleashing the curse she had contained, Messmer asks his mother's forgiveness. He apologizes to her for becoming the lord devoid of light, for releasing the serpent she had sealed, for failing to remain the contained and loyal son she had made him. In the moment of his greatest defiance, the tearing out of her seal, he is still the loyal son, still seeking his mother's forgiveness, still bound to her by the love that had sustained his eternity of waiting. He releases the curse and apologizes for releasing it, defies his mother and begs her pardon in the same breath. The Lightless Serpent rises. With the seal torn out, Messmer became what the lore calls Base Serpent Messmer, the Abyssal Serpent rising at last in the body of the abandoned son. He transformed, the Lightless Serpent he had contained for an eternity rising through him. The demigod able now to become a massive red serpent, to strike with the power of the abyss he had held down. The curse that had threatened to subsume him from birth, the serpent his mother had maimed him to seal, rose at last, released by Messmer's own hand in his desperation and his despair. The Lord devoid of light embraced the lightlessness, the contained catastrophe loosed. The serpent and the sun become one in the final phase of the battle. His words in this state carry the darkness of what he had become. "Soon, tarnished," he said, "wilt thou be taken in the jaws of the Abyssal Serpent, shorn of light." He spoke as the serpent now, the lightless thing he had become, threatening the tarnished with the jaws of the abyss, the serpent shorn of light that he had released and embraced. The being who had hated his fire and feared his serpent had become the serpent, the lord devoid of light, the lightless creature of the abyss that his mother's seal had contained and his own hand had loosed. There is a terrible completion in this. Across the whole of his existence, Messmer had held the serpent down, contained the curse. kept the lightless thing suppressed beneath his mother's seal. He had been a being of contained catastrophe, holding down the darkness within him out of duty and loyalty and the light of his mother's grace, and in the end, abandoned and defeated and despairing, he let it go. He tore out the seal, released the serpent, became the Lord devoid of light. The loyalty that had held the catastrophe in check broke at last, and Messmer became the thing he had feared. The lightless serpent rising in the body of the sun, his mother had abandoned to the dark. The curse upon her. The tarnished even against the serpent prevailed, and landed the fatal blow upon Messmer, and in his dying came the last and truest reckoning of his whole existence. As he fell, Messmer spoke his final words, and they are the only time in his entire story that he names his mother. "O lightless creature," he said, "embrace thine oblivion, as shall I." And then, with his dying breath, "Mother, Marika, a curse upon thee." In that moment, the lore tells us, Messmer realized that his mother had indeed forsaken him. Across the eternity of the sealed realm, he had waged her war and waited for her return, holding to the loyalty that had defined his existence. And in his dying, facing the end, he understood at last that she was never coming, that she had abandoned him, that the loyalty he had kept for an eternity had been given to a mother who had forsaken him entirely. The realization broke the loyalty that had held across the ages, and the loyal son, in his last breath, cursed the mother he had served. The significance of his naming her cannot be overstated. Across the whole of his story, through the Crusade and the Scapegoat role and the eternity of waiting, Messmer never named his mother in defiance, never cursed her, never broke the loyalty that bound him to her. He apologized to her even as he tore out her seal. He waged her war and bore her sins and waited for her return, the loyal son to the end. And only in his dying, only when he understood at last that she had forsaken him, did he name her Mother Marika and curse her. The single naming, the single curse, is the breaking of an eternity of loyalty. The loyal son's last reckoning with the mother who had used and abandoned and erased him. The love that had sustained him turned at the very end into the curse she had earned. There is heartbreak in the timing of it. Messmer kept his loyalty across an eternity, through every cruelty, every use, every year of the abandonment, and he broke it only at the moment of his death, only when he understood the truth he had refused to accept, only when the realization that she had forsaken him came at last. The curse was not the curse of a rebel or a traitor. It was the curse of a loyal son who had loved his mother to the end of an eternity and understood, only in his dying, that the love had been given to one who had thrown him away. Mother, Marika, a curse upon thee, upon. The last words of the loyal son, naming and cursing at last the mother who had earned the curse across an eternity of abandonment. There is one more layer to the words, in the line that precedes the curse. O lightless creature, embrace thine oblivion, as shall I. Messmer speaks here both to the serpent and to himself, the lightless creature he had become, and the oblivion he goes to. He embraces his own oblivion, accepts his death, goes into the dark as the Lord devoid of light. The being who had spent an eternity holding the lightless serpent in check, waiting in the sealed realm for a mother who would not come, accepts at the end the oblivion he goes to, the lightless death of the lightless Lord. He had been devoid of light in the end, the serpent risen, the seal torn out, the grace gone, and he embraces the oblivion that the lightlessness brings, going into the dark as the abandoned son. the Lord devoid of light accepting the lightless end. The whole of Messmer's tragedy is compressed into these last words. The serpent he had feared, now embraced. The mother he had loved, now cursed. The oblivion he goes to, now accepted. The loyal son, abandoned and erased, ends as the Lord devoid of light, embracing his oblivion and cursing his mother in the same dying breath. The love and the loyalty of an eternity collapsed at last into the curse and the darkness that his mother's abandonment had earned. Mother, Marika, a curse upon thee. The end of the loyal son, the breaking of an eternity, the love turned to curse in the lightless dark. The last of the Hornsent, there is a figure present at the edge of Messmer's end who completes the circle of the Crusade, and he deserves a moment before we gather the whole story. A Hornsent survives into the time of the Tarnished, one of the last of the people Messmer's crusade had destroyed. He can accompany the Tarnished, and he can be summoned for the battle against Messmer. The last of the Hornsent come to face the Impaler, who had exterminated his people. The law gives the Hornsent his grievance plainly. The Erdtree is his people's enemy, the golden order that burned them, betrayed by Marika and set aflame. He carries the hatred of the Crusade, the survivor's rage against the people who had destroyed his own. There is a terrible symmetry in the Hornsent facing Messmer. The Crusade had begun with the Hornsent's atrocity against Marika's people, the butchery of the shamans into jars. Marika's vengeance, carried out by Messmer, had answered that atrocity with the extermination of the Hornsent. And now, at the end, the last of the Hornsent comes to face Messmer, the survivor of the exterminated people confronting the commander who had exterminated them. The wheel of vengeance comes full circle. The Hornsent who butchered the shamans, and the crusade that exterminated the Hornsent meeting at last in the survivor who faces the Impaler. Atrocity answering atrocity, answering atrocity across the generations. And Messmer, facing the last of the Hornsent, carries his own complicated burden. If the Hornsent is not summoned, the law suggests, Messmer feels the weight of being a failure. Unable to complete the vengeance, the survivor of the Hornsent persisting as evidence that the crusade had not finished its terrible work. The crusade had consumed Messmer's existence, made him the Impaler, loaded him with the blame, and even at the end, the question of whether the extermination was complete weighed on him, the terrible work of his mother's vengeance unfinished, while a single Hornsent survived. The circle of the crusade, the atrocity and the vengeance and the survivor, closed around Messmer at his end, the commander of the extermination facing the last of the exterminated in the final battle of his eternal war. What Messmer was. The story of Messmer is the story of a son who gave everything to a mother who used him, and who understood it only as he died. He was born, perhaps the firstborn, the eldest son of the Eternal Queen, with the red hair of Radagon, and a vision of fire and a serpent coiled in his flesh. He was maimed by his mother to seal the serpent, made to carry a fire he hated and a curse he feared. He was sent on a crusade to exterminate the Hornsent, the people who had butchered his mother's village, a vengeance that was hers and not his. He became the Impaler, the symbol of fear, the monster of the crusade, made into a thing of terror by his curse and his obedience. He was loaded with the blame for his mother's vengeance, the scapegoat who carried her sins. And he was sealed in the land of shadow, cut off and erased, abandoned to wage the eternal war, and wait an eternity for a mother who would never return. Through all of it, he was loyal. This is the thread that runs through Messmer's whole existence, and it is what makes him tragic rather than monstrous. He hated his fire and wielded it because his mother commanded. He feared his serpent and contained it with her seal. He waged the crusade he had not chosen out of loyalty to her. He carried the blame for her vengeance out of devotion. He waited an eternity for her return out of a faith that survived every cruelty. He was the most loyal of all Marika's children, the son who gave everything and asked nothing, who served and suffered and waited out of a love that his mother never returned, and his mother repaid this loyalty with the most complete abandonment of any of her children. The Omen were imprisoned but remained in the world. The demigods were defeated but remembered. Messmer was sealed in a hidden realm and erased from history, the only child removed from the world and struck from the record, abandoned so wholly that the world forgot he had existed. The most loyal son received the most complete abandonment. The child who gave everything erased entirely. The love that asked nothing repaid with an oblivion that left nothing. This is the tragedy of Messmer, and it is among the saddest in all of Elden Ring. He was not a villain who did evil for its own sake. He was a loyal son who did terrible things out of love for his mother, who carried her sins and waged her war and waited for her return, and who understood only in his dying that the love had been given to one who had thrown him away. The fire he hated, the serpent he feared, the crusade he had not chosen, the blame he had not earned, the eternity of waiting, all of it given out of loyalty to a mother who sealed him in the shadow and erased him from the world. And at the end, the loyal son tore out her seal, became the Lord devoid of light, and cursed her with his dying breath, the single curse that broke an eternity of loyalty. The love turned at last into the malediction she had earned. He had asked, perhaps, that the maledictions and the ire and the grief be directed at him alone. In the end, he directed his own malediction where it belonged. Mother, Marika, a curse upon thee. The loyal son, abandoned and erased, naming and cursing at last the mother who had used him and thrown him away. The love of an eternity become, in his dying breath, the curse she had earned. This has been the entire timeline of Messmer the Impaler, the firstborn son of Marika, the bearer of fire and the serpent, the commander of the crusade, the scapegoat and the abandoned, the Lord devoid of light, born to a god and erased by her, loyal to the end of an eternity and cursing her with his last breath, told slowly, for the quiet between waking and whatever waits in the dark. Good night, my friend.